Let's do it. Hello, hi, and howdy. Welcome back to Breaking Tradition. So, like I said in the intro, churches or church buildings, as followers and believers of God, we're supposed to find one. And then after we find one, we're supposed to go to these buildings every week to gather together as believers and worship God and worship Jesus. And there's some out there who are so bold as to tell us that if we don't do this, then we're not being good believers and we're not being good followers and we're not being good Christians. The problem with that is that Father Yahweh nor Yeshua ever told us to A, build these buildings, or to B, meet at them, and whether it be once a week or once a year. This is all man-made tradition. And what's even more troubling is how these buildings came to be in the first place. So without further ado, let me go and hush up, and we're just going to jump right into it to find out what is the origin of these places called churches and why we actually should not be meeting at them. All right. So let's start at the very beginning. So as you can see here, I typed in a very simple question to Google. Who built the first church? Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Here's the $1,000,000 question. Who told Christians to build church buildings? Very, very interesting answer here. It says no single biblical figure commanded Christians to build physical church buildings. Okay, so for the benefit of those who might be listening to this and not looking at it, let me read this again. No single biblical figure commanded Christians to build physical church buildings. In the New Testament, the word church or ecclesia, as it's been incorrectly translated, refers to the community of believers, not a building. Early Christians met primarily in homes, synagogues, or catacombs. Physical church buildings were a later development driven by the practical needs of growing communities and later imperial favor. Now, I want us to remember this right here, why the physical buildings also referred to as churches, how they developed and why they came to be. But let's hop back here to the most important part. The word church or ecclesia does not refer to a building. So when people say or talk about going to church, including myself, because I've also incorrectly used that phrase, we, the humans, the believers, the followers, we are the church, or more correctly, the ecclesia, or the called out ones. So in other words, if we just say that we're going to church, how can we go to ourselves? When you stop and think about it that way, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But most of the time when people say they're going to church, by this point in human history, it's just automatically assumed and known that people are talking about going to one of these brick and mortar structures. Okay. Hop back over here. So yes, it's actually community of believers, or like I said, as this word ecclesia means, called out ones, not a building. Early Christians met primarily in homes, synagogues, or catacombs. Early meeting places. During the first 2 centuries, communities were small enough to gather in private homes, often called house churches. Transition buildings. By the late 3rd and early 4th century, Christians began remodeling buildings for worship or constructing simple halls. But here's the main point. Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. The widespread construction of large, dedicated church buildings or basilicas began after Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in the year 321 AD. He and later Roman leaders financed the construction of grand buildings to publicly support the religion. Now, as anybody who's been watching or listening to this show for any amount of time, you all know this name right here should not be strange to you whatsoever. As I always say, whenever you want to find out how the true precepts, laws, and commandments of Father Yahweh, and then later reinforced by his son, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus, how that gets mushed together with pre-Christian pagan traditions, images, idols, and ideologies, it always, 99.9% of the time will come right back to this man right here, Constantine. Okay, always. So I wanted to point this out because this gave us the foundation of the entire point of this. It was not commanded or instructed by Father Yahweh and then later on Yeshua to build these buildings. It just wasn't. You can see right here for yourself. Now, you'll have those that argue, well, we don't see what's wrong with it. The Israelites built temples. They had temples. Yeah, they did. And you know why? Because Father Yahweh instructed them to build those temples. Not just instructed them to build them, but he gave them, boy, as I always say, God is the great or the greatest, insert whatever word you want to. In this instance, the greatest architect, because he told them how many rooms to have in this temple and the exact measurements of where each room's supposed to be, even the outside of the temple, going to the courtyards, and what exactly he wanted put in that temple. And for the different sections of the temple, who and what was allowed to be in those different sections. So yeah, anybody who wants to argue that point, you're right. Father Yahweh definitely did instruct his people to build these temples. But the point is, going back to God in the flesh, Yeshua, he never instructed the building of any type of new buildings, whether they be temples or otherwise, as far as going out and now beginning to preach and teach the kingdom of God. If he had intended that, then he would have given those instructions to the apostles before he sent them out. But you can check the Gospels from Matthew right on through the beginning of Acts, and you won't see that. Because this move of the kingdom of God is supposed to be constantly in motion. The problem with these buildings, incorrectly called churches, is they make people get stationary. Okay, you get complacent. If the instruction and the edict was to go out into the world and do da 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 da, well, how you gonna do that if you're sitting in a building for the next 50, 60 years of your life until you pass away? All right. So, yeah, like I said, the foundation here, going right back to our usual suspect here, Emperor Constantine and the whole Roman and then later Roman Catholic movement. All right. So now we're going to look at who built the first church. And even here, It reiterates the point. The first church was not a building, but a community of early followers of Jesus who gathered in Jerusalem around 33 AD. According to Christian tradition, Jesus Christ established the foundation of the church, and the apostles, specifically my granddad Peter and my namesake James, led the very first congregation. So even with this right here, this is not talking about the foundation of the church again as a building. When Jesus told Simon Peter, okay, flesh and blood have not told you this, it must have been revealed to you by the Holy Spirit. Upon this rock, I will build my church. He was talking to a flesh and blood human. Clearly, he wasn't calling Peter a rock, nor letting him know that he was going to become a rock. It was the proclamation that Peter had made, the recognition of Yeshua as being the Messiah and the Christ. That foundation, okay, that assurity, which was as strong as a rock, that is what Yeshua the Christ was talking about building his church on. And even his church, as we just saw with the other definition through Google, the ecclesia, he was talking about humans, called out ones, group of flesh and blood people, not building brand new buildings and structures. So that is the church he was talking about building upon and the foundation. All right. So the first physical church buildings. When looking for the first actual structures built specifically as churches, the answers shift to archaeology. You got one that was discovered in Syria in the 1930s. You got the Megiddo Church in Israel, yielded artifacts to around the early 3rd century, around the year 230 AD, potentially making it one of the oldest, if not oldest, purpose-built Christian structures. All right, but here's the big boy. San Giovanni in Laterano, Rome. Of course, it's Rome. The oldest purpose-built public basilica with a known builder. It was constructed by who else? Emperor Constantine, and officially dedicated in 324 AD after he legalized Christianity in the Roman Empire. Okay, so we ain't gonna keep harping on this. Like I said, this man-made traditional stuff that gets itself passed off as the move of God and the will of God and Christianity and all this stuff. Again, it's always Rome, and 99.9% of the time, it's always Emperor Constantine. Now, I have done plenty of older episodes talking about why Constantine did this in the midst of Rome, which was a polytheistic society. Polytheistic simply means they believed in and worshiped multiple gods, lowercase g, and goddesses, lowercase g. Now, wanted to hammer home that point because that leads into the next part. And speaking of their polytheism, check out a little bit of this article from the ancientworldmagazine.com website. A temple for all the gods, the Pantheon in Rome. Okay. The Pantheon in Rome is one of the best known structures in the city, visited by countless tourists in years when we aren't all suffering from the strains of the global koof. It is also one of the best preserved ancient monuments in Rome, as it was turned into a Christian church in the early 7th century AD, ensuring it would remain more or less intact for many years to come. The name by which it is known, Pantheon, derives from the ancient Greek meaning of all the gods. Most ancient temples were dedicated to one deity, like the Parthenon in Athens, dedicated to Athena, or a small group of deity, like the temple of Mars Ultor in Rome. The latter was dedicated by Augustus and featured the statue of Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, flanked by a statue of Venus, his lover, also the ancestral deity of the Julii, and the deified Julius Caesar, whom Augustus had avenged. But this building is probably even more noteworthy for its construction. Okay, we're not going to read all that part when I get down here. The biggest difference between the Pantheon as it is today and what it looked like back in ancient times is that originally the ceiling was gilded. At the front of the building is a monumental porch with 16 granite columns. Another rectangular structure is found at the back with rooms and stairs. Okay, so the building of the first, I'll just refer to as Christian church at this point, was not a fluke nor an accident by Constantine and the Romans, because as we see right here, again, going back to their practice of polytheism, the Romans and the Grecians always built buildings and structures dedicated to whatever god or goddess that they worshiped. It was no different when it came to them incorporating Jesus, Yeshua, and his father Yahweh. So in other words, to say, all right, just as they worship Mars and Athena and the rest of them, okay, this new god that they just simply added in right along with the rest of their gods, it would need, or they would need, a dedicated building to them as well. And that's where you get the formation of modern day quote unquote Christian churches. But I want to, let me get myself on here because I want y'all to take a very good look at this structure, the Pantheon. So as I said, this building was built, okay, to house and dedicated to all, or at least a good bit of the Roman gods and some of the Grecian gods. And you see this structure right out in front of it here. Now, this structure hails from Egypt. This is not a Roman invention or construction. It's Egyptian. And the word we use for it, roughly translated, is the word obelisk. Now, you'd be like, okay, so what's the big deal about that? Why is that important? Well, we're about to get into that in a minute, but I wanted to make sure it was shown. So this obelisk and all this other imagery here, this sunburst and this cross on top, okay, yeah, none of this has anything to do with Father Yahweh, God. None of this has anything to do with Yeshua, Jesus. This is all, again, for lack of a better term, pre-Christian, pre-Jesus. These symbols and these structures, all of it, every bit of it. And these two parts of it, the starburst and the cross specifically, are originated from Babylon in worship of their gods and goddesses. Remember, y'all, like I said earlier, and like I always say, when it comes to these things and Rome, that is what they do. They had a practice of taking other civilizations, that most notably deities from other civilizations, African and what's known as Middle Eastern and Persian, and simply Eastern, taking theirs and incorporating them into their worship and giving them their Roman and Grecian names. But the belief and worship of these deities did not originate in Rome or Greece. They originated in those other places. So the starburst and this cross, yeah, this is Babylonian. It goes back to Tammuz, and it goes back to his mom and quote unquote father. So already we ain't starting off on a good foot, because how can these buildings that are supposed to be for Christian worship of Christ, why would they incorporate symbols and structures from Babylonian paganism? You know? Now, again, take a good look at this and remember that description. And we just have some pictures here of modern church buildings. And just like we saw the obelisk structure out front, yeah, that was the basis for these steeples that you see in modern churches. And see how it's built here? Just like the obelisk with the cross on top. Yeah, same thing. The obelisk with the cross on top. Yeah, going on down here. Obelisk with a cross, obelisk with a cross, obelisk with a cross, obelisk with a cross. Now, of course, being that they were incorporating these from other civilizations, as was their practice to do, they put their own spin on it. And then even other European nations that end up converting to Christianity, all right, they put their spin on the architecture a bit. But the basis is still there. Yeah, it's all still there. They call them steeples, but they're obelisks. They're Egyptian obelisks. Same exact thing. Same construction. Steeples with a cross, obelisk with a cross, obelisk with a cross, obelisk with a cross, obelisk with a cross. All right, back down here, the biggest difference between the Pantheon as it is today and what it looked like in ancient times, ceiling was I keep saying ceiling was gilded. But want to focus on this part right here again. At the front of the building is the monumental porch with 16 granite columns. Another rectangular structure is found at the back with rooms and stairs. Okay, and what are a lot of church buildings constructed as? Yeah, the buildings are rectangular. Okay, see, we got a rectangle there. All right, let's go back up. Yeah, that's rectangular shaped. All right, rectangle here. Oh, this is a real good example. Rectangle there. And remember the marble, remember the columns? Okay, it might not be 16 of them, but yeah, here we go. Marble columns. Well, you can barely see it in this one, but see some columns right there. Columns right there. Rectangle building, rectangle building. Rectangle, rectangle. Got some columns right there. And depending on how you get it built, okay, you got stairs. Some of them do have porches. Okay, what else? Yep, got a porch and some stairs there. And got some stairs there. Now remember now that this Pantheon what was built in dedication to all the gods. All the gods. But yet so many modern day churches are constructed the exact same way, but it's supposed to be made in honor or dedication to our God or Jesus. And even when it talks about the inside, So we already saw the rectangular structure, rooms and stairs. But yeah, you go into a lot of these modern churches, but what do they look like on the inside? They got rooms in the back. They got stairs leading up to the or right behind or around the altar called the pulpit with rooms in the back. It's literally the same exact thing. Changed up a bit, stylized a bit, depending on the culture, but the same basic idea is there. Steeples with crosses on top, columns, stairs and porches, rectangular shaped, and then full of rooms. Literally the exact same thing. Now, for right now, we're just going to stick to the outside. We're going to go into the actual inside, and boy, oh boy, that's where the pagan imagery really ramps up. So this obelisk and this steeple, okay, JK, you keep mentioning, you keep talking about what's so special about this prejudgment. Well, so glad you asked. Let's check it out. Okay, we got an article here from the restoredchurchofgod.com. Please explain the origin of the steeples and spires that are commonly found as part of the architecture of modern church buildings. These structures long preceded Christianity. Literally what I've already established. Yeah, all that stuff around thousands of years before the word Christian was ever even created or uttered. Dating back to fertility ceremonies of ancient pagan religions. Pagan priests used an upright stone, pillar, obelisk, or slender tower to represent the male sex organ. Even today, a stylized union of male and female genitals is found in many cultures. Yeah, that's why I keep harping on this. That's what this represents. Okay, the male penis, the male sex organ. And if you go further down, these are usually surrounded by or within a circle right in the middle of it. The circle represents the female sex organ, the vagina. So the whole imagery here is literally a man's penis inside a woman's vagina. All right, but let's keep going. Notice, as to the lingam representing the male organ in some form or other, as upright stone or pillar or obelisk or slender round tower, it occurs all over the world, notably in Ireland, and forms such a memorial of the adoration paid by early folk to the great emblem and instrument of human fertility, as cannot be mistaken. Above all, no doubt there were images of the phallus and the vulva, the great symbols of human fertility. The Encyclopedia Britannica states this of the spire. It is a symbol of the heavenly aspirations of pious medieval men. Well, no, actually, as I already established, this predates the medieval period. Way, okay, again, thousands of years. And when you look at the origins of the obelisk, they had nothing to do with heavenly aspirations of men. No. The earliest of man's heavenly aspirations is recorded in Genesis chapter 11, verse 4. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. Speaking of the steeples, spires, and other forms of idolatrous high places, God expressed to Israel his contempt for such structures in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 30. And I will destroy your high places and cut down your images and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. Mhm. So again, if Father Yahweh or Yeshua the Christ had intended for structures to be built, they darn sure wouldn't have had them built with pre-Christian pagan images, idols, and structures, which, as we just saw and just read, are what these things are, made and dedicated to all gods, all pagan gods and deities, not the God of heaven. So yeah, that's why I kept harping on this. So now every time, whether it's your church you go to, or every time you pass by one of the ones that look like this, yeah, just remember you're looking at ancient men's dedication to the male junk. Okay. I mean, honestly, it's not really hard to believe because look how the darn thing is structured. It's long and comes to a point. And anybody who's ever taken any psychology classes, I'm sure at some point you came across that chapter or that information where it's shared that many of the structures that we have in the world, yeah, they're purposely made to resemble male penises and the female vagina. That is not by accident. So yeah, like I said, every time you see one of these now, just remember that's supposed to be a man's junk. All right. So yeah, we are actually going to stop there for tonight. But just a quick recap for the start of this series. It's already been established. The command was never given to believers to build buildings by Father Yahweh nor his son, Yeshua HaMashiach. If the command had been made, then it would have been instituted and overseen by the apostles. But it wasn't. Can't argue with the facts. And it's also been established that when these buildings were constructed, they were constructed in the old Roman thought process and practice of building and constructing them the same way they built and constructed all temples and structures to all the other gods that they worshiped. So there wasn't really much separation here, as we've already seen. So, no, the instruction was not given to us to build buildings and then incorrectly call them churches. And it was not given to us to have to go to these places. So, yeah, again, just some good groundwork there, just talking about how these building structures even came about and looking at the basic design of them, where that came from. So, Lord willing, next time we're going to actually go inside of these structures and take a look at a lot of the things that you find in many of these churches, and also show how they too have pre-Christian pagan origins to them and have absolutely nothing to do with God the Father nor God the Son. And again, just like the basic outside of the structure, how they were actually spoken against and commanded against not to do by God the Father. But man and his dirty self, okay, he just went and did it anyway. Okay. So, guys, as always, well, guys and gals, as always, thank y'all so much for joining this old country boy. You hear me jawing about it for a little while. Appreciate you. If you would, please do all that good YouTube and Rumble stuff. Make sure to like this video, drop a comment, hey, share your thoughts. If you believe this, if you knew it, if you don't believe it, if you don't see any problem with these church buildings whatsoever, hey, converse with me. Holler at your man. All right, let me know. Okay, definitely please subscribe and or follow the channel. And as always, share this with somebody who you think might want to hear it or might need to hear it. Also, if you want to listen to this episode again on the go and don't want to watch it, then check the description and you will find the links to the audio versions. You'll be found on Spotify, Amazon, Audible, iHeartRadio, and Spreaker.com. Both video and audio versions are completely free. No subscription fee, no membership fee. So watch them, listen to them, download them, share them to your heart's content. Okay? All right. So, guys, as always, make sure to love yourselves, but seek to love other people just a bit more. Okay? Because that is the first greatest commandment. That is actually a commandment from Father Yahweh and Yeshua. Okay? To love one another. Not to be going out building ancient pagan structures dedicated to man's junk and women's junk. Okay? No, that wasn't a commandment. Okay? All right. Guys, make sure to stay safe, stay prayed up, stay watchful, and Lord willing, we will be back here to do it all again. So until then, I will see y'all when I see you. Peace.